Good afternoon guys and welcome back. So today we're going to be talking about how to stop your Jeep rusting out. Alright, so rust is definitely a number one killer of Jeeps, especially second-hand older Jeeps like my 2005 TJ. So when I first bought my Jeep, it wasn't in the best shape. It was pretty tidy for an 05, I must admit, but it still had surface rust on the chassis and underneath the Jeep. Which is going to happen. I live near a beach, and even just salt spray is going to corrode majority of the parts underneath the Jeep. But I do a lot of beach driving. I try and stay out of salt water as much as possible, but it's hard. You've always got to go through a few washouts and stuff like that. That salt water is just going to get absolutely covered on the underside of your Jeep. So I've got a 3-step formula that I do. I do it probably every 3 to 6 months. You might want to do it a few more times depending if you live in a country that salts their roads during winter, because I've seen a few stories from people and the chassis and stuff is completely rusted out, and that could cost you absolutely thousands of dollars for a new chassis, or you might as well just scrap it and buy a whole new Jeep. So let's jump underneath the Jeep, and I want to show you my 3-step formula to protect your Jeep. Alright, sorry about that. I thought there was going to be a bit more room underneath the Jeep than there was, but unfortunately not. So, step 1 that I do is I use a wash wax. I normally use this on the paint as well, but it works really well on the underbody, especially the Bowden Zone one, because their products are made for classic cars. Well, it's based around classic cars. Classic cars are notorious for rusting out. So he's added the owner, Dan Bowden, has added he's built in an anti-rust additives to help with rust protective on older cars, but which is also really good and useful on Jeeps as well, especially when you're driving at the beach or in conditions where salt might be on the road. So what I do a 2-bucket wash, and I put just a cap full of the formula into the bucket, hose it up or foam it up like you would normally do with when washing your car. If it's winter, use warm or hot water to make it a bit more pleasurable so your hands don't get too cold. Then I just get a normal rag, an older one, and I really get up into all those small crevices that you've got in your chassis rails, all up in there. And I also put a hose in all these little holes and just let it flood out. Pay attention to all these little gaps where salt can get into, up in there, all those little crevices and stuff like that. Now what I do, I actually get underneath the car and do everything by hand. I spend probably an hour every 4 to 6 months getting everything done by hand. It is time consuming, it's hard on your back, but in the long run it's going to save the life of your Jeep. Now a lot of people say, oh, just grab a gurney and or a water blast or whatever you want to call it and just spray underneath my Jeep. I'm like, that's fine, you can do that, but just be mindful of the high pressure. You can end up pushing salt and dirt further into all these little cracks that make it a lot harder to try and get out in the future, all up in those little areas. So the high pressure water does get your car cleaner, but, well, it makes it easier to clean, I should say. It doesn't make it cleaner, it makes it easier to clean, which would save you time. But it actually pushes dirt further into places, which makes it a lot harder to get to. So just be mindful of that. All I do is when I'm cleaning the car, well, when I'm cleaning the Jeep, I just get the hose, get down on my back or my knees, and just hose it down. Or you can get, I think it's like a little runner or something that's got like little things that weigh back and forth that you can actually slide underneath your vehicle to help clean it. So you just use a general hose, don't use high pressure. Then do your washing up, use 2 buckets. One, a rinse bucket, which is going to take all the salt that you're washing off that's in your rag. Just going to take all that salt out of that, then you're going to put it in a fresh bucket of clean water. It's got your cleaning product in it, and then do your next section. Alright, now we're going to move on to step 2, see what that is. Alright, so step 2, everybody should know about this, is WD-40. Now it stops squeaks, drives out moisture, cleans and protects and loosens rusted parts. Exactly what you wanted to do. Now I spray this stuff not on all over the underneath of my Jeep. I mostly pay attention to parts that are already starting to rust. It's just got surface rust on them to help to protect it. All my bolts for my control arms, suspension parts, tie rod ends and stuff that I may need to take off or get loose in the future. I really don't want those parts seizing up and rusting, and also those little gaps that you can't get to with a cloth. So say that gap there, all those little parts between like the chassis rail and the floor of your Jeep, all I do is I spray it into those little gaps, let that dry, and away you go. And it served me well. It's really good. It's not overly expensive. I think I bought a 6-pack of these from Costco for $10, so it's relatively cheap. And the wash wax I get, which is Australian made, I buy it locally, is $30 for a 2-litre container, which it probably lasts me 8 months, a 2-litre container, so it's pretty cost efficient. And then the last step I take after I let the washing dry, I let the WD-40 dry, I let that all work in. So maybe the next day, if you haven't driven the vehicle, I go over it with a rust guard. Now this is by White Knight rust guard. It's a 1-step no primer formula. So when I first bought my Jeep, and I was saying that it had a little bit of surface rust, I cleaned it all down, did these 2 steps, and I completely coated the entire underneath of my Jeep with rust guard. Now all you got to do is put on a face mask, get under the Jeep, and just spray pretty much every component down, let that dry, and I did 2 coats, and I do 2 coats every 6 to 12 months, depending on how many trips up the beach I've done, or if I see any rust forming. Also, if I've just replaced a few parts, like say I replaced a control arm last week, and then I did a beach strip and I could see a little bit of surface rust starting to form on the bolt that I've taken off, I've just gone through with WD-40 first, let that dry, and I've gone over rust guard to stop it rusting even further. Now it's up to you how often you want to do these steps. I do it kind of changes, but I do 4 to 6 months, and then rust guard it every 6 to 12 months. But if I'm doing more beach trips, I'm getting more salt, I'm getting more rust. Well, not more rust, it's more likely I won't get rust, so I do it more often. Or if I'm doing a big camping trip up the beach, I'm up there for a few days, that salt and sand has time to set in and start working its magic and rusting it out. So I might do an even bigger wash underneath. But if you live in a place that has salt on the roads, and you don't really get the opportunity to do it that often, spend the summer and really get into it. Spend the time, do it properly. It's really going to pay off in the long run. I've seen a few horror stories of people posting photos on Instagram and on Facebook about chassis completely rusted out, and they're like, oh, but it's a good buy, it's only a couple $1,000. Yeah, well, it might cost you a couple $1,000 to buy the Jeep. It's going to cost you a couple $1,000 to fix the whole frame up. I've also seen people, it's a good deal, it's only got floor rust. If the first person that buys it takes care of it, it's going to last a lifetime. But yeah, if you're one of those people that have it as a bush basher or just a hardcore four-wheel drive. You don't really have to do it if you don't want to. It's one of those things that if you want to keep your Jeep for a long time, it's good to do these things to keep it lasting for a long time, so it serves you well. It makes the maintenance on the car a lot easier when you've got a cleaner surface to work on. Parts aren't rusted, you're not snapping tools, you're not snapping bolts, so it makes replacing parts so much easier if they're not rusted, if they're not corroded. But if you're buying a second-hand Jeep, especially one that's, even JKs can have a lot of rust, but I find that a lot of TJs, especially the older ones, 97, like pre-2000s, definitely have a lot more rust in these new, like 2000 onwards. This is 2005, it had a little bit of surface rust when I bought it. It's got a few little spots where stone chips have hit the paint. I'm in the process of touching those up now. And I may do a video in the future of that. But these 3 steps are definitely a great, cheap way to protect the underneath of your Jeep, and just to make it last a whole lot longer. Then you can get out, wheel more, have more fun, and enjoy what we all love to do. Alright, so that's pretty much it for today, guys. I hope these 3 tips that I've got help you protect the inside of your Jeep to make it last a lifetime. I'd love it if you guys could please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and if you've got anything to add, please leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you. But that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys next time.